Hi, welcome back to my channel. So if you want some sort of GCSE Religious Studies advice, this video is for you. Or if you're just here for the vibes and you're not doing religious studies, hi, I don't know why you're here, but I appreciate the view. So I did my GCSE Religious Studies AQA A exam back last year in year 11. I'm currently in year 12, and I would say that it was probably one of my strongest 9s that I had gotten, in terms of like, once I came out of that exam, I was very certain that I did well in that, because just GCSE Religious Studies in general for me has been a subject that I haven't worried about, because it's something that I've just always understood. But I do know a lot of people that really struggle with it, and so I decided to make this video because a lot of you guys have been asking me how you can get better at GCSE Religious Studies and exactly what sort of things you can do to get better, especially in those essays, because those are the ones that people find most difficult. So what I'm planning on doing in this video is firstly just going over a few general tips that I had done to do well in my GCSE exam, and then at the end of the video we're going to go over some questions and just seeing how my thought process is. And you have to remember that I haven't touched GCSE Religious Studies in about like a year now. Well, not really a year, it's been like a couple of months, but even then I'm not going to know a lot of stuff. There's probably going to be a lot of stuff that I've forgotten already, but you know, I hope this video will help you guys in some sort of way. And yeah, let's just get straight into it. Now, usually for a GCSE subject, I wouldn't recommend making notes, but GCSE Religious Studies was one of the rare subjects where I had made like a full set of notes during lessons, because I would say that religious studies is based on understanding concepts rather than just like learning information. So you don't need to make like flashcards, for example. But one thing I found very useful in GCSE Religious Studies was mind maps. Mind maps actually help so much, not in terms of just like the content and linking things together, but also quotations. And I am going to touch on quotations later on in this video as well, and hopefully make your life so much easier with quotations. But for now, I would say that making notes is really important for religious studies, but it's not essential. I know a lot of people that haven't made notes but still did really well. If you don't know what I did for my religions, Christianity and Islam, and then for my paper 2, which is the thematic studies, I did themes B, so that's religion, life; theme C, God and Revelation; theme D, which I can't remember what it is, I think it's peace and conflict; and then theme F, which is religion and justice. I think I got them all right. I still remember those somehow. You do your paper 1 right, but it consists of 2 separate papers, but you do them all in one sitting. So for me, when I did my GCSE exam for Religious Studies, the paper 1, we had the Christianity paper first, and as soon as that one finished, they took the Christianity papers away, and then they were like, okay, you can begin on the Islam one, and then we did that. So that's how it works for paper 1. And then for paper 2, you get all, I think it's 5 or 6 themes all at once, and you have to remember which themes you're doing. So like, you'd have to skip through themes A and E for me, but like, it just depends on what themes your school is doing. But hopefully the tips I give you today are going to help no matter what themes you do and what religions you do. I'm pretty sure everyone has to do Christianity anyways, but yeah, so notes is very important, especially just understanding that material. So one thing I was very lucky with is, because I'm Muslim myself, all the Islam content stuff, so all those like Arabic words and like all those different things that Muslims do in like Eid and things, all that I knew, and so that made the subject a whole lot easier for me and a whole lot more interesting, because I could like relate to a lot of things and I could see all these viewpoints and things, especially in the ethics section of religious studies. It was genuinely one of my favorite GCSEs. It's a really interesting GCSE, and I really recommend anyone who doesn't do it to take it, especially if one of the religions your school does is one that you follow yourself. It makes the whole subject so much easier. A lot of people stress way too much about quotations in religious studies. I don't think they're that much of a problem. I mean, you only have one question really where you need a quotation, and that's the question 4, where they ask you to compare 2 different things or say 2 similar things or some sort of comparison or similarity thing, and then you have to include a quotation as well. I do really recommend though to put as many quotations as you can in your question 5, which is your essay. What I usually do is whatever quotation I put for question 4, any of the remainder quotations for that section that I had learned, I would just chuck them all into the essay, because the more quotations you have, the more like the better your structure of that essay is. It's not like English where you have to like really analyze the quotations that you put. You can literally just chuck them in, put one line of explanation and just move on. I would say that the analysis you have to do in religious studies is nowhere near as complicated as English, which is one reason I struggled a lot with English back in GCSE. But with religious studies, you're just trying to expand on points and show different viewpoints, and it's not that hard once you get the hang of it and once you actually understand how to get that like 11 and 12 out of 12 in those essays. Also for quotations, I used to constantly blurt them, which is where you just like write every single thing down that you remember off memory, and then open the book or whatever you're looking at, or your notes or whatever, and see which ones you missed out, and then put them in a different color, and then do it again and again until you actually remember all the quotations. I remember that right before my actual exams, I would sit there and I'd just write all the quotations I'd remember. So I would go to, for example, Christianity practices, and I'd just put as many quotations as I remember for that, and then I would go to Islamic practices, for example, and then do as many quotations for that, and then check if I had remembered all of them or not. And another thing I would also do is I would go through a list of all the different question 4s and 3s, even the question 3s that don't ask for quotations. I'd still try and think of a quotation for them, just so I always know what to put. And I have a really good list of questions that I highly recommend you guys check out. It's something that I made back last year when we had advanced information. So I basically made any type of question they could possibly answer on like one bullet point of information they gave in the advanced information, and I'd have a good like 15 questions just for that one bullet point. So in total there was a good 50 or so questions, and I didn't actually answer all of them, but I just went through and I thought to myself, can I answer this? Yes, I can. Okay, can I do this one? Can I do a quotation for this one? It was basically like I was trying to prepare for the worst case scenario, and then the exam questions themselves, they weren't nearly as bad as the ones that I had prepared for, and so they became so much easier. So I'm going to have it linked down below for free. I highly recommend you just check it out. It's only for Christianity and Islam, but I mean, I think everyone does Christianity anyways, so you can always check that one out. And yeah, I hope you guys find that useful. It was very useful to me back last year. I spent a long time making that, but it was very worth it. Another thing that I made last year for our advanced information papers, because they had given us like a few bullet points in terms of what's going to be in the exam, was like a predicted paper that I made trying to predict the questions in the thing. And what I did was I did that paper like a few days before the actual exam, and it has the mark scheme and everything in it. It is down below in the description if you guys want to check it out. I mean, sure, it's probably not going to apply to next year in terms of the paper and the questions. It's probably not going to predict it correctly, but it's still good practice. It's like an additional past paper that you can practice. Some of the questions that I did in it were past questions that I had put back in because they seemed very liable to come up again, but then there were other ones that I created myself, and I created a mark scheme myself for it as well. So yeah, and if we just go to it right now over here, I managed to predict this question, this essay question over here. I mean, I'm not going to tell you what it is because, I mean, you can check it out in the description, but if in case you don't want it spoiled to you and you still want to do practice on it, then by all means you can do that. But I predicted this question over here, the Christian practices question. That exact thing came up as the essay, which I'm so like, I mean, that one I kind of expected, to be honest. This one though, I don't know how I predicted this one. I just put it in because there had to be a question on prophets, and it came up. The Islamic beliefs question 5, that came up as well, and I managed to predict some of the question 4s and the question 3s as well. I don't know how I did that, but I remember coming out of that exam and like it was such a good exam because I had prepared so well for those questions, and the fact that they actually came up basically word for word was just the freest of marks. I was so glad about that. So yeah, make sure you check this paper out down below in the description as well. It's nice practice. If you don't know how to mark your question 5s, you can always send them to me, you can email them to me, I can try and mark them for you. So yeah, so that's that. But the next part that I would say that's probably really difficult about religious studies, and something that's just notorious in religious studies, is the timing. I mean, the timing in religious studies is horrible. This is probably what I'm guessing makes religious studies more difficult of a subject, because overall I would say it's pretty much an easy GCSE, but with the time constraints in the exam, it makes it so much more difficult, because the essay that you need to write is not very difficult most of the time. The standard that they want you to write it in, obviously it's there's a bar, but it's not that high compared to like English language and English literature, where the stakes are much higher because they expect such more like top level analysis, whereas in this it's just you're stating different viewpoints and you're comparing them and things. But I think the difficult part is making sure you quickly brew up some sort of comparison between arguments in a short span of time, because you like by the end of a religious studies paper, if your hand hasn't broken because of how much like essays you've had to write, then you've done something wrong, or you haven't written enough, because the amount of stuff you have to write, it has to be really, really concise. Whereas in like English, you need to write a lot of stuff to make sure you compare everything really well. In religious studies, you're trying to just make it as concise as possible. So you mention all the things you need to mention, then you move on to the next essay, because you've got 4 essays to write in one paper, and that is a lot. Like doing one essay after the other, it can get really, really tiring. And so you really, really need to practice your timing. The best way to do that is just writing essays in the short span of time that they give you. So ideally, if you can get an essay done in about 15 minutes, you're good to go. That sounds like a really short amount of time, and it is a short amount of time, but you need to make sure you squish that. Like, you need to make sure you rush it, but don't rush it too much to the point where you're losing out on useful information. You have to have that good middle way, and that's something you're just going to have to practice with. Luckily, RS essays aren't that long. They don't take a long amount of time. They're difficult to start, but once you've actually gotten an idea of what you're going to put in each paragraph, it's very easy to write. It's just that like thinking up of an idea, it can be very difficult, especially if the question they give you is a bit like weird and you haven't really thought about that kind of thing before. Especially in the paper 1, they like to give really obscure paper 1 questions for the essays, and so it will really make you want to think about that and perhaps lose time. And if you do get an essay question that you just don't know what to write for, skip it, go to a one that you actually do know what to write for, then come back to that one, because you have no time to waste sitting there thinking of an answer when you could be doing a question 3 somewhere else. So you've got question 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 right for section 1, and then question 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for section 2, and so on for 4 sections. I did it like this. So I did question 5 for section 1 first, then I did 1, 2, 3, 4, then I went to section 2, did question 5 again, then I did 1, 2, 3, 4, I went to section 3, did question 5 again, then 1, 2, 3, 4. That was my structure, and that, in my opinion, was the best way for me, because it made sure that I got the essay out of the way first, and then I could worry about all the smaller questions. Because if you think about it, if you run out of time on a question 1 or a question 2, I mean, if you run out of time on a question 1, I don't know what you're doing, but if you run out of time on a question 3, for example, you've only lost what, like 4 marks, perhaps 3, or like 2 if you've written enough information. But for running out of time for a 12 marker, or 15 if it's like the +3 spag marks, that is so much worse, because you could lose out on so many more marks. So you're always trying to prioritize those essays and trying to make sure that they're polished before you try and focus on the question 3s and the 4s. They're also just as important, but you need to make sure you worry about the question 5 first, and then start doing question 5 and 4. That's how I recommend you guys do it. I mean, if you don't like that sort of structure, by all means do it question 1 to 5, but it's just how it worked for me, and I think that's something you're going to have to just test out, especially in like the last couple of weeks before your exams. I recommend just sitting down and doing an entire paper all the way through, and just seeing if you can get that practice in. Not for the case of, I mean, obviously it's important to get those marks in as well and do well, but it's also just as important to make sure you finish the papers on time, because the amount of times that like things go wrong in the papers because you just run out of time is just too much, especially for religious language. There's one thing I might do if you guys really want me to, and that is a sort of like crash course on religious studies as a whole, and have like a few long videos of me just going through the entire specification and just letting you guys know exactly what you need to learn and what you could be examined on, and doing like a few past paper questions as well. If you guys want to see something like that, just let me know in the comments if that's something that perhaps you could benefit from. I might make like a 1 hour, 2 hour long video of me just going through the entirety of paper 1, the entirety of paper 2, and then like a exam paper or something. So yeah, if you guys do want to see something like that, then let me know down in the comments below. But now we're going to move on to a few questions and seeing exactly how I come across answering these questions, and exactly what you can do to like do them to the best of your ability. Okay, let's go for this one here. The November 2021 paper 2 B textual studies. So Let's click on that. So this is Religious Studies A, as I had said before, which is the one I'm doing. You might perhaps be doing a different, like, there's Religious Studies B as well, but yeah, I don't know what the difference is, but yeah. So here's section A. I didn't do section A for mine, so I'm gonna skip that. Let's go to section B. For example, with this, I would probably quickly look at 2.1 and quickly answer that and then move to question 5, because, I mean, question 1 takes less than a second. If you're spending time thinking about question 1, that's a bit of a problem, because these should really just come to you really quickly. So, for example, which one of the following describes a feeling of amazement at the complexity and beauty of the world? Awe and wonder, obviously. I mean, you don't even need to think about that one. I remember for our 2022 exam, we got a really weird question for our question 2. It was like, so it was this theme B as well, right? And it was like, give 2 ways religious believers can experience awe and wonder in the world around them, or something like that. And the stuff that people put for that was actually hilarious. I can't remember, what did I put for that? I remember putting like the patterns on leaves. That was one of the things I put. And then I put like, I think I put like the universe, because why not? I'm not even sure. I can't remember what I put for that. But so with a question 2, you're always trying to just bullet point 2 quick informations. You're not trying to elaborate, because that's just a waste of time. Remember, religious studies is a game of time. You're trying to save that time for the question 5 and the question 4. For now, all you want to do is just put 2 bullet points. So for example, 2 ways that they can help protect the world's natural resources. So I'm going to say like protests, climate change protests to stop global pollution or something, I don't know. And then let's say recycling. Okay, yeah, so I said recycle. Do we have any protesting here? Explain 2 contrasting religious views about how the universe began. So this is where you need to bring in your existing knowledge. So I mean, it says religious views, so you're going to have to bring in your Christianity, you're going to have to bring in your Islam, or whatever religions you're doing. You can stick just to Christianity and be like, conservative Christians believe in just like, so they're the young earth creationists, the ones that believe in the 6-day creation story. So with a question 3, the way you want to do this is 2 short paragraphs. You want to mention a point, then explain why they believe this, and then mention your second point and explain why they believe this for this kind of question. So I would say for the first like paragraph, I would say that conservative Christians, so it's usually with these kind of questions, conservatives and liberals, this is the easiest way to compare. I mean, sure, it might not be accurate to real life sometimes, but it's just the easiest way to grab the marks. We're not talking about real life here. And one thing my teacher used to always say is, it doesn't matter what you believe, it's just about getting the marks. So it's got nothing to do with what you think, like, for example, for your question 5, you can, in your conclusion, if you're an atheist, you can still say, I agree with the Christian view on whatever. You can say that. The examiners couldn't care less. Or if you're just trying to say something to fit the way you're writing in the thing, and you're trying to put a conclusion that's an opposing view, then you can do that by all means. They aren't going to fact check and see if you're actually an atheist or not, or if you're actually a Christian or not. They don't care. You can literally say anything in the conclusion, as long as it makes some sort of sense and you actually back it up with some sort of reasoning, then you're fine. It doesn't matter. So if we go back to the question 3 over here about the universe beginning, I would put the conservatives in one paragraph, say that they're young earth creationists, which means that they believe that the earth was created, the whole universe was created in the span of 6 days, and I can talk about Genesis a tiny bit. The reason they believe this, okay, it's always, that's a way to force yourself to try and get the second mark. The reason they believe this is that they follow the Bible literally, and so they use the Genesis story word for word, and they believe that it was created in 6 days because that's what it says in the thing. Whereas old earth creationists, they would say that this is only metaphorical. They're being liberal about it. In fact, the universe was created over the period of 6 long periods of time. It doesn't have to be 6 short days. It's just a metaphorical sense. Question 4, explain 2 religious beliefs about the use of animals for food. Once again, this is a really, really easy mistake that you could possibly make, and it's to not include religious beliefs. So it says 2 religious beliefs. That means you're going to have to put 2 things that have to do with religion. You can't say, on one hand, vegans believe this about animals. You can't say that because vegans aren't a religious group. But you could say, for example, that, like, I think it's Quakers don't do they not eat meat? I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, I can't remember. All this has escaped my mind, but it's the same structure, right? But in one of your 2 paragraphs this time, you're going to just put a quotation and perhaps 1 line of explanation. One thing that people find difficult about quotations is they just think that they need to know so much, because like they need to know one for animals, they need to know one for the environment, they need to know one. But you can technically, if you have any quotation in your head, you can technically bring it in and somehow relate that quotation back to the question. So one quotation I used to use all the time for the Christian papers and for anything Christian based was, "In the beginning was the Word." That's the one I used to use so much. Whenever I didn't know a quotation, I'll just put that in and try and relate that back to Jesus somehow, and then relate that back to what the question says. And for Islam, the one I would always put is Allah the One, because that's such an, like, you can always bring monotheism into any sort of Islam related question and then put the quotation in. So generally, like, you don't need to memorize that many quotations. Now we have a question 5 here. Death is not the end, there is an afterlife. This is such a common theme B question. Like, they are really lazy with this question 5. This is like a really, I think we got a very similar question to ours in our theme B for 2022, but ours was a bit weirder. Ours was phrased really weirdly, and that was the one that I kind of misunderstood and misinterpreted. I can't remember what it was now, but I didn't like that question. That was the only one that I had to like properly, like, I got stumped by it, and I had to like think. I had to like slow down and be like, what is going on with this question? But in terms of this, death is not the end, there's an afterlife. The way I phrase my question 5s, is I have 4 paragraphs. Paragraph 1 is in agreement of whatever the statement says, and what I'd do is I'd just put on the side agree, and I'd put colon, and then I'd just put a few groups of people that would agree with the statement. So death is not the end, there's an afterlife. Obviously all the religious groups are going to believe with that, so I'm going to put Muslims, Christians would believe that death is not the end, there's an afterlife. And then I would explain the Christian point of view on afterlife first, and go into why they would say that death is not the end and why there's an afterlife. Then I'd go into the Muslim point of view, say why they believe there's an afterlife, and if I know any quotations, to chuck them in, and then explain a bit about the afterlife as well. Obviously you're trying not to waffle, because this is religious studies. Religious studies, you just can't waffle because you don't have the time. If you do spend too long talking about heaven and hell when you just don't need to that much, then you are going to lose out on time somewhere else in the paper. So you have to try and be like very concise, and if you do have time at the end, you can always by all means go back into that essay and start writing more. I used to always like do the essay really quickly first, and then if I had time afterwards, I'd just put asterisks in random places and start like adding more information in, which is perfectly fine as well. And then for paragraph 2, I mean, obviously I'm going to have the disagreeers and anyone who would go against the statement. So in this case, death is not the end, there's an afterlife. Obviously I'd put in atheists and like materialists and people who don't believe in like a soul, for example. I'd try and go into that, and any figures that were atheists, I'd try and bring them in here as well. So for example, like Epicurus, I think, was someone who didn't believe in an afterlife. You can talk about those, talk about what they taught, and talk about their reasoning. This is also another important part. Like, you have to always talk about why they believe something. There's always like different types of knowledge, right? Some people would believe in something because of scripture, others would believe something because they were told that. That can also be through scripture, but others would believe something because they see it through their senses. But yeah, you're always trying to justify why certain groups believe in certain things and why perhaps they might disagree on some things, and that is the way of getting those high marks. So after you do your paragraph 1 and your paragraph 2, in these ones you're trying not to put counter arguments in, you're trying not to point their flaws out, you're just trying to say why they believe what they believe, right? So why do Christians believe in an afterlife? Paragraph 1. Why do Muslims believe in an afterlife? Also paragraph 1. And then why do atheists not believe in an afterlife? And then talk about specific people, for example, and why their reasoning is not to believe in an afterlife. And then in paragraph 3, I'm going to start talking about the counter arguments to the things that the other groups of people have said. So for example, what are the flaws of just believing in scripture? What's the flaws of fideism? What's the flaws of... You see what I'm trying to do, right? It's all just based upon like combating everything that has been said in the previous 2 paragraphs. That's what paragraph 3 is about for me. Obviously you don't have to follow my structure here. This is something I'm just giving you as an outline in case you do struggle with trying to structure your question 5s. If that's something that you don't know how to do, then I recommend following the structure, but you can always follow the structure that your teacher's given you if you find that more useful. Paragraph 4, the last paragraph, is just a conclusion. In conclusion, I would agree with X group of people, and then put a bit more reasoning into why. That's also very important. And just explain a bit, maybe put another quotation in, and just explain why you think, even though of these counter arguments, it's still the most robust argument of all the ones that are there. Then I'll go straight to the next section and do the exact same thing again and again and again, until I'm finally done with the paper and I can finally relax my hand. And yeah, that is how I revised for my religious studies papers back in year 11, and how I managed to get a 9 in it, and how you can potentially get a 9 in it as well, or at least improve from the grade that you're already at. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you guys do enough practice and get the grades that you deserve. If you have any sort of questions about religious studies or any GCSE subjects in general, or even some A-level advice that you might want, you can always message me in my email. You can always comment down below and I'll try and answer if I can. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys found it somewhat useful, and I'll see you again next time. Bye for now.